Welcome back to the morning show here on Rise News. As a parent or guardian providing a child with all the necessary education and protection, it's key to fostering a healthy upbringing. For this reason, every child has the right to go to school free from fear. When schools provide quality, inclusive and safe education, children can learn, build friendships and gain the critical skills they need to navigate social situations. In the best circumstances, schools put children on the path to a promising future. However, when school becomes where kids experience violence, bullying, harassment, verbal abuse, sexual abuse, exploitation, corporal punishment, and other forms of humiliation, the aim and purpose of what school represents is defeated. Child abuse can come from anybody, from students, teachers, or even a school authority that is supposed to cater to the welfare of the child and they can turn to the oppressor. In Lagos, the police command has arrested a private nursery school teacher, Stella Nwadigo, for allegedly assaulting a 3-year-old pupil, Michael Abayomi. In a viral video posted on X, Nwadigo, a teacher at Christ Methodist School in Ikorodu, was seen on Wednesday subjecting the pupil to rounds of slaps over his inability to write numerical figures. This begs the question, do teachers have the right to punish or discipline a child in our educational system? When did learning become a punishable offense in the handbook of teachers? Joining us on the show to discuss this is Titilola Vivour-Adeniyi, Executive Secretary of the Lagos State Domestic and Sexual Violence Agency, and Thank God Ocheho, a child psychologist. Good morning to you both and welcome to the morning show.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mrs. Adeniyi and Mr. Ocheho. Thank you very much indeed. Well, child abuse, it's a major issue, not just in Lagos State, but elsewhere in the country. Lagos State particularly is one of the signatories to the, or one of those states that has domesticated the Child Rights Act. And Lagos State also frowns upon acts of violence, any form of violence. But this child abuse, the big question that I want to ask both of you is that, look, when my generation was growing up, there was this mantra that spare the rod and spoil the child. But all of a sudden now we hear parents saying, oh, don't touch my child. Don't, teachers who act in local parentis, don't, touch my child. Okay, what happened to that spare the rod and spoil the child? Because there are many spoiled children all over the place now. So, please, can you help us explain this? Does it mean that principle is already out of the window? And because parents are paying very huge school fees, they don't want teachers to help them discipline their children. They don't even want neighbors. They used to say it takes a village to raise a child. If you misbehave in the neighborhood, the neighbor will beat you up and report you to your mother. But now it looks like everybody is in the elite class of children can just grow up, as they wish. Let's start with you, Mrs. Adeniyi, and then we'll come to you, Mr. Ocheho.
Thank you so much. So, Dr. Bati, you spoke about, I listened intently to what you said. You talked about discipline. You talked about correction. So there's a fine line between disciplining a child and abusing a child. We are not saying that children should not be corrected. In fact, it's in the law. Section 201 of the Criminal Law of Lagos State makes provision for correction of children. But it must not be such that grievous harm is inflicted on the child. And so that same section talks about the force not being unreasonable. And it must be done having consideration of the age, the physical, and the mental state of mind of the child. The child must be able to appreciate why they are being corrected. So we are not saying that children should not be corrected. No, our socialization, our culture, we are in an African setting, allows for correction. But when it now becomes grievous, when it now becomes to the point where the child is inflicted with injuries, the child loses sight of an eye, the child lacks capacity to walk and function and think and operate, that ceases to be correction. that is now physical abuse, which is frowned upon in the law.
Okay, very good. Mr. Ocheho, over to you. In other words, teachers should not be aggressive.
Okay, thank you very much.
Teachers should not, go beyond correction to inflict harm. What do you think?
Okay, thank you very much once again for having me. I think the concept of spare the rod and spoil the child, we need to also go back to the origin of what context in which that particular statement was made, because it's important for us to understand the context before we begin to apply it in our current realities. So when you talk about the rod there, I think it's talk about discipline. So nobody is against discipline of a child, but what we are against is the approach, the method that you use to discipline the child. So if you also look at that same context in which that quote was used, there's also the context where it says, the rod and the staff, it comfort me. So if the rod can comfort, it means there's a form of discipline that can make a child behave well and not inflict pain on the child. I think it's very important for us to understand this, that no one is against discipline. Nobody is saying that a child should not be corrected. But what we are saying is that the approach and the methodology that you use to discipline the child is very critical, because it's not just about the immediate outcome that you achieve. We're also looking at the long-term implication of the approach that you are using. So we need to pay attention, not just only on the outcome, but also on the process, because both are very much important. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I'll go to Mrs. Vivour-Adeniyi first of all, and I'll come to you, Mr. Ocheho. Mrs. Vivour-Adeniyi, I know that your office has now taken on the case of what happened in the Ikorodu school involving a Miss Stella Nwadigo. Some people who saw the video of her abusing that child because he couldn't pronounce or write actually a numerical figure were horrified by that video. And the truth is that it's one video out of many. She's one teacher out of many. It's not just about her, but what is the process when your office gets involved in a case like this? What happens? We saw her being, detained. But what goes on beyond this? And very importantly, prevention is better than cure. We don't want to just apprehend these perpetrators. We want to prevent these incidents from happening in our schools, not just in Lagos, but across Nigeria. What happens, and then what will you do, what will your office do next to ensure that we prevent such incidents from happening? Then for Mr. Ocheho, my question to you would be a focus on teachers. I know you're a child psychologist, but if you look at that video and the following video where she was begging and saying, no, she didn't know she's a mother herself, a lot of teachers are not trained. They don't understand the difference between discipline and grievous body harm or abuse. What can we do to train teachers to ensure that they are able to manage the children that are left in their care? I'll come to you, Mrs. Vivour-Adeniyi, and then Mr. Ocheho, you can please answer the question. Mrs. Adeniyi, can you hear me?
Okay. So, yes, I can hear you. All right. So in Lagos State, what we have is a multidisciplinary approach to handling safeguarding and child protection issues. And that's the beauty of the system that is in place under the able leadership of Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu. We have a Lagos State Safeguarding and Child Protection Task Force, which basically comprises top-level representatives of relevant ministries, such as the Ministry of Youth and Social Development, Office of Education Quality Assurance, Lagos State Safety Commission, the DSVA, Child Protection Network, the police. So we go as a team. In this particular situation, officers are already on their way to the school. We go as a team to visit the school. The suspect has been removed from that environment, but we are more concerned about the structures in that school to ensure that we don't have a repeat incident. For the purpose of information, aside from the Child's Rights Law, which we have in Lagos State as far back as 2007, which was amended in 2015, we have the Lagos State Safeguarding and Child Protection Policy that was passed as an executive order in 2016. And that executive order mandates all child-centered institutions to adopt a safeguarding and child protection policy. And then it lists different mechanisms that must be put in place to ensure safety of children in child-centered institutions. And so, as a team, we go to such an institution, we find out different organizations are looking for different things. For instance, Office of Education Quality Assurance, they want to know, is this school registered with government? Safety Commission wants to know if safety measures are in place. Ministry of Youth and Social Development, Social Welfare, they want to know, has that child or that offending employee of the school, has their actions affected other students in that institution? We want to know if the school has adopted a safeguarding and child protection policy. And aside from, conducting these on-the-spot assessments, we now understand the peculiarity of that situation and then propose recommendations. So for instance, last year, the task force visited over 34 schools. We received reports from those schools. Our recommendation was that some of those schools should be shut down. 12 of those schools were shut down because of safety and safety infractions. And it's not just about shutting down a school. That's like the highest level of recommendation that we give. It can be, let us build capacity of the teachers to ensure that they are able to detect signs of abuse, to ensure that the school has the safeguarding and child protection policy on ground, to ensure that there is a designated safeguarding and child protection officer, to ensure safer recruitment procedures are adhered to ensure children are routinely engaged on their rights, their responsibilities, and to build capacity of these guidance counselors to be able to handle disclosures. So our approach is not necessarily limited to enforcement. We believe in building capacity of these relevant institutions so that such kind of incident does not reoccur.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ocheho, teachers and training for teachers.
Yeah, so I think it's very important we pay attention to that, and it's an holistic approach. For instance, most schools tend to focus on subject expertise when they're trying to recruit teachers into the school system. So the major question they have during interview most time is how the knowledge of the teachers and how if they are expert of the subject they are coming in to teach. But nobody take assessment in terms of their psychological makeup to really understand or to really know if they understand the implications or the psychology impact or implication of child abuse or how to work or relate with children. So most time we don't pay attention to these areas. And also we need to understand that some teachers coming to the school system have been abused growing up themselves. There's what calls childhood trauma, which is having effect on the teachers even in their adulthood stage. So most time it's also important for the school to do an assessment of all the teacher to be sure that some of them are even psychologically stable to raise children or to take care of children. And we don't really pay attention to that. So what we do when we work with schools or train schools is that we try to run assessment to see if this teacher is qualified in terms of their psychological makeup to be able to work with the children. And most importantly, it's important for us to begin to embed the psychological training, especially when we talk about trauma-informed care or trauma sensitivity into the curriculum. Before, I believe that teacher must have gone through some training. So they must have also gone through this particular training in the curriculum where teachers are trained to understand what we call trauma sensitivity, how to relate with children, how to identify children who are traumatized, and how they themselves must have gone through the process so that they don't inflict trauma on children. There's also what we call the do no harm approach, where you as a teacher, your style, your methodology, you must ensure it does not cause harm to the student. It's a major principle that every teacher needs to be aware of. So I think we need to look at our system as a whole within the society to see the training process in which the teachers go through. What are the things that are taught in the curriculum? What are they expected to do? What are the behavior? I know the other guests have emphasized the need for safeguarding and child protection policy, which is very important. But I think that training bit is also important for a teacher to go through that. And also there's need for constant awareness within the classroom among teachers so that we know the mental health impact of child abuse and the things things that children go through when they're exposed to the environment that they are being abused. So I think when we tackle it from the different direction, it's going to help us to raise children that can thrive and flourish within the classroom. Because the classroom is supposed to be a place where children learn with joy and excitement, not where they learn with pain. That's why sometimes children don't like going to school, not because they don't want to go to school, but because they have associated the school system with pain. And that is why they are always avoiding the school system. Or if not the school system, they are avoiding that particular teacher that always inflict them with pain. And because of that, learning is impeded. It's difficult for them to learn, and they are not making progress, not because they don't have the potential to do so, but because of the kind of environment that have been created for them, the potential is not being activated, and we're having problems within the society.
Thank you so much for that. I'll start with you, Mr. Ocheho. And I'm sure you're aware that right now the popular trend is what people are calling gentle parenting. The type of parenting where you do not beat your children, you use creative ways of disciplining them, but they lead with the fact that they say you should always converse with your child as a means of trying to instill discipline. Some advocates of gentle parenting even say that you shouldn't even send your young child to the naughty corner. There's quite a broad spectrum. Now, I'm bringing this up because you've spoken of training teachers according to the curriculum and so forth. But the reality right now in Nigeria is that there's so many different schools providing different sets of curricula. You have Nigerian curriculum, British curriculum, French, Italian. There's such a wide array going on. So my question to you is, how can we standardize that, especially in the world where parents are now gravitating towards this gentle parenting trend? And also, what's your take on gentle parenting? Because I'm a mother to a 3-year-old. When I watched that video, it really touched me, because I understand how difficult it is for them to even just draw a circle properly. But the attack was very grievous. But what are the alternative disciplinary actions that can be taken that are as effective as our parents thought corporal punishment were? That's for you, Mr. Ocheho. After you answer, I just want to quickly ask Mrs. Vivour-Adeniyi her question, which is that, I've already sort of painted the picture of how there's so many different schools and curriculum mushrooming in every corner. Every corner you look, there's a school, especially when it comes to preschool, nursery school. There are some streets that have at least 10 preschools or nursery schools. How can parents know which schools are duly registered? What are some of the things that parents should be looking out for when doing due diligence, so they know that they're truly sending their children to genuine schools and not to some quack, workshop that has just mushroomed out of nowhere overnight? Mr. Ocheho, you can go ahead first.
Okay, thank you very much. So let me begin by saying that most times when we copy things, especially from the Western world, we don't do that intelligently. We just copy and come to our system and paste it. But I think it's very important for us to understand that context differs, and even children different in terms of their makeup, whether it's their psychological makeup or their physical makeup. So it's important for us to be able to first look at our system, look at our culture, and do what I call a need assessment. In terms of developing curriculum, we need to do a needs assessment to assess our environment, assess our system, and see what works. There's nothing wrong in copying, but we also need to contextualize whatever we are copying to see that, okay, this works within our system. Not just bringing something that is being applied in other contexts and we think that it's going to work in our context. So that's a major gap I think every school system needs to begin to look into and address. Most times schools don't do that intensive hard work to be able to do that survey, that assessment, to come up with a standardized curriculum based on what they have seen within our context and what we think will work. We just feel because it's working somewhere else, it's important for us to bring it into our own system. Talking about gentle parenting, I think it's important for us to even understand the concept of discipline. The word discipline is from the word discipline, which means learning, which means training. And it's important for us to understand that when you're raising a child, the end goal, when you are disciplining the child, is because you want a change in behavior. behavior. Not necessarily the change in behavior in the short term, but the change in behavior also in the long term. So people talk about gentle parenting. It's different from a laissez-faire approach of parenting a child where you allow the child to do anything the child wants. No, there's an environment and system you've created. There's the rules and regulation that guide the system. So if the child does not follow that rule, of course there are consequences, but not consequences that inflict the kind of pain that a child is unable to bear, because you must understand that every child is vulnerable. So once we have that in perspective, we must also understand that the foundation of discipline is love. Most time, parents or caregivers or teachers who are unable to control their anger or their temper, they inflict it on the child and they say it's a discipline. So there's a thin line, and we must understand there's what called displacement, which is a defense mechanism. When I can't transfer my anger or a pain on something that is stronger, I will put it on something that is less safer. So for instance, maybe your boss offends you at work, but you know you cannot slap your boss because he is your boss. So displacement say that you will transfer the aggression on a child because you know it's your child. You can inflict pain on the child and nothing will happen. You understand? So that is what a lot of people do, especially caregivers who have not dealt with their own trauma, so they are inflicting it on the child. So we are saying that children can be disciplined, but the foundation should be from a place of love, learning from their mistake. And there's what called double jeopardy. Let me give you an example. A child put his hand inside fire and he got burnt, and you come again and beat the child. That is double jeopardy, because the child putting the hand inside fire has always learned already that that is not a safe, act to be able to do. So the child will find it difficult to be able to do it next time, because he already learned that fire can hurt me and I don't want to do that. You inflicting pain on the child again for doing that is just what called double jeopardy. So sometimes children themselves, they are human beings like you. They learn from the consequences of their behavior, and we need to begin to teach them consequences. And when we do that, we can also begin to discipline them in a different ways, but not necessarily the way that will inflict pain on them. So nobody is against discipline. The issue of gentle parenting, and most time people say, oh, well, when we are growing up, our parents use corporal punishment on us and we become who we are today. Trust me, when you look at what people are using to say they become who they are today, they're only looking at maybe in terms of the material success that they have, but you don't know that certain things have been lost in your growing up years. For instance, your ability to take risks, you have developed anger problem, you are becoming aggressive. People don't look at all of those parts. They just look at, the father, I was able to go to school, I'm working, I'm doing well, I'm making money, that is why I'm successful. But you don't understand the emotional baggage that you have as a result of the approach that were used on you growing up. So it's important for us to be able to create a balance and see that, yes, children needs to be disciplined so that they can grow up well. However, we must create an environment for them to be disciplined with love so that they can thrive and become who we want them to become in life, because that is very important when we talk about discipline. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Vivour-Adeniyi, how do we spot these the unregistered institutions that are mushrooming everywhere before we enroll our children?
Thank you. So it's about making inquiries, finding out if the schools are registered with either the Ministry of Education. And when we talk about registration, it's in different phases. There's registration such as registration of the name. There's registration to provide creche services. It's possible that an institution has a creche, a nursery, a primary, and a secondary school. It's possible for the institution to be registered to provide creche and nursery services, but not primary. And so you go in and you make inquiries. It's important to find out what that institution is registered for. And this is crucial, because we have seen the data, and the data shows that a huge majority, a majority of schools where we get incidents of child protection concerns from are unregistered schools. And if a school is not registered, they don't have the benefit of taking advantage of the different training opportunities that the state government has for institutions and educators. So, for instance, we have a program coming up at the end of the month where we're training guidance counselors and school administrators. We are going to leverage on the schools the directory of schools that are registered in the particular district we are going to build their capacity. So a school that is not registered and is in that locality will be missing out of that training program. So as parents, it's not enough to be concerned about the curriculum. Is it British? Is it Nigerian? But we have to find out what measures the school has put in place to ensure safety. So another issue may be, does your school have a safeguarding and child protection policy? Does your school have a designated safeguarding and child protection officer? You visit the school, are there any posters in conspicuous places talking about the rights of children, talking about who your child can report to if they are experiencing any form of violence? So these are some of the things we can do as parents to be proactive whilst we're considering schools for our children.
Adeniyi, just before we go, very quickly. Now we keep hearing these stories about, schools where there are issues with child abuse or violence. Can you cite or remind us, some instances in which the state government has sanctioned these schools, or the teachers have been made to face the full wrath of the law where they have been found guilty? And then these unregistered schools, how many are they? And is there an active inspectorate division of the state government going from school to school to find out on a regular basis to ensure standards? Very briefly, please.
Yes, sir. So there's a whole Office of Education Quality Assurance. It's within their mandate to look at schools that are registered, schools that are not registered, encourage them to register, sanction, close. They do that with the support of the Honorable Commissioner of Education. So they have that monitoring department, and they are in the 6 education districts in Lagos State. In terms of citing schools, we have Chrisland School, for instance. I can speak about that because we have a conviction, although it's an appeal now at the Supreme Court. But the supervisor of that school was convicted for sexually abusing a child in the school. So aside from that particular case, whilst we were investigating, a part of the school had to be shut down because we did not want any interference with investigations. So we look at it on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes the government may need to shut down the school. Sometimes they may be put on a red alert. They may put in sanctions, impose sanctions, put them on different codes. We have amber, green, red, depending on the severity of case that is reported in that school. Monitor that school, build capacity where necessary of the service providers, and come back 6 months, 1 year later to confirm and to monitor assessment of the impact we have made in ensuring that children are safe in that environment.
Thank you very much for your time with us this morning, Mrs. Titilola Vivour-Adeniyi and Mr. Thank Ocheho, for speaking to us on this very pertinent issue. We look forward to seeing how the case with Ms. Nwadigo unveils and hopefully how we prevent these kind of incidents from happening in our schools in Lagos and across Nigeria.